In January 2013, my grandfather was in hospice care in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with maybe a week or two left to live. I was in Connecticut visiting my friend Jess when I got the news, so I cut my visit short and flew off to sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida on January 14th. I had zero clue what to expect, and not because I'd never been to hospice or watched someone die. It was because in January 2013, my grandfather, with whom I'd only been reunited 3 years prior, after 22 years of not knowing him or my grandmother, because during the divorce proceedings with my father, he hastily wrote on a sticky note he did not want to see us again, and then disappeared from our lives forever. That grandfather was dying in hospice care in Fort Lauderdale with maybe a week or two left to live. Anyone in here who has ever lost somebody or been walked out on has dreamed of a reunion like the movies or the TV shows. My reunion fantasy was that my terrible biological father would somehow rescue us from our terrible stepdad, and would come at a time when our stepdad was being particularly abusive and my father would save us. Rory's dad in Gilmore Girls always showed up at the right time. Yes. Sometimes Sean's dad in Boy Meets World showed up at the right time. And Phoebe from Friends got her reunion, so surely ours would come. I let a few people know what was going on. They all asked me the same question. What are you going to say to him? And I didn't know. And that really frustrated me because I'd had 22 years to think about this. But so much had happened between leaving at 6 years old and then finally having to be reunited. My urge to be reunited with him and understand why he left us and gave us up so easily was dampened and replaced with my need to survive my abusive stepfather and the chaos that surrounded my brothers and me, and that's another monologue. Also, this isn't something you can Google, right? You can't get a list on BuzzFeed about how to deal with meeting your father after 20 years, or a funny viral article, you know you come from a broken home when. I was on my own trying to figure this out. I should also mention here, and this is important, my mom came with us because she'd been really close to my father's parents. She lost her mom when she was 17 and had also had a rather chaotic upbringing herself, so her and my grandparents really bonded when my father and her got married. Also, don't tell her, and I know this is on YouTube, I think a part of her wanted to show off / see what he looked like now, so there was a little bit of a revenge factor. So we managed to get into my grandfather's room during a moment when my father wasn't there, and I think he was tipped off that we were coming, and so he probably went to the parking lot to collect his balls or something and give himself a pep talk. And I sometimes like to imagine what that must have been like, and I'm sure he convinced himself that we couldn't possibly remember what had happened, or we can't be mad at him, and this should just go fine. I was a mess in the hospital room because I knew he'd be there at any moment, and also my grandfather was dying, and that's a very emotional process in itself. My heart was racing and I was sweating, partly because I was wearing Chicago winter clothing in South Florida, but also because I was very anxious about what was about to happen. And this was it, the man that I had wanted to meet for the past 22 years, whose butt chin I have, and whose nose and all of its Jewishness and deviated septumness I have, and whose stature and disposition that my brother Brandon has, and whose really bushy eyebrows and full head of hair my brother Greg has, and whose last name that we all had for the first years of our lives had, and all of the little pieces of him that were inside of us. This was it. We were finally going to get to see each other. He was going to walk in, and just like the TV shows, just like with Phoebe and Rory and Sean, he's going to walk in and hug us and tell us he missed us and ask us how we are and comment about how beautiful we are, take us out to dinner, maybe ice cream, laugh at our stories, ask how we're doing, tell us he's proud, and in he walks. Ah, the gang's all here! He shakes my brother's hand and he says, Greg. And he moves over to me and he shakes my hand and he says, Ashley. It's like he's trying to remember our names. And he moves on to my other brother and he says, Brandon, and he shakes his hand. And then he sees my mom and he tries to give her a hug and a kiss and he says, it's so good to see you, how have you been? And I'm dumbfounded. I'm like, that didn't just happen, right? There's gonna be more. Everything's gonna calm down. We're all gonna be hanging out in the hospital room and he's gonna pull us aside and tell us how much he missed us. He ignored us for the next 2 days. We sat in the room together for 2 days and he wouldn't look at us or reference us or talk to us. And I wasn't gonna be the one to start the conversation because as far as I'm concerned, I didn't do shit wrong. The onus was his and his only. In fact, there was a moment when my grandmother and my brother and I were the only ones in the room, and he came into the room and had to look past us to get to see my grandmother and asked her if she wanted anything to eat because he was going down to the cafeteria, and she said no, and he turned around and left. Whatever, I wasn't hungry anyway. It was surreal. It's like we were being rejected all over again. But this time, I wasn't 6 years old. And I wanted to tell him to man the fuck up and own your shit. And stop being such a douche nozzle. We got through the rest of the week unscathed. There was a couple days. My grandfather didn't wind up passing away until a few days later, after I was back in Chicago. But when I got back to Chicago, and I don't mean this hyperbolically, I was changed, and for the better. All the gaps that I thought I needed to fill in my entire life were gone, and I felt free. Because I'm going to connect it to the theme of the night, ladies. Yes. When life rains out garbage, specifically garbage parents, it pours out perspective. And here's what I got. 1, sometimes you have to be the one to grant yourself closure to move on with your life. I will likely never get an explanation or an apology from him, and I have to be okay with that. Because quite frankly, I just don't have the time or energy to think about it anymore. Seriously, I got shit to do. 2, I reject the notion that you cannot pick your own family. The people in my life love/slightly tolerate me, leaps and bounds over the man who helped give me life. And 3, there is a tiny part of me that wants to thank him for setting me up to accept rejection. As an actor/improviser, you get rejected 97% of the time you try out for things. And the remaining 3% of the time you're convinced they accidentally picked you, you don't belong, oh my god, we're all so insecure, please laugh now. Thank you. So I feel a bit untouchable and a little bit cocky in that regard because, I didn't get cast for that part? No worries. My father rejected me twice. And the last thing that I sort of came out of this with is I'm pretty awesome, and he missed out. And then I'm supposed to mic drop here, but I'm not going to do that, so that's it.